Here we are, the Wines for Spain annual tasting 2021, and we should have been doing it a few months back, but we couldn't. But so there are, as you know, a series of these tastings happening. This is the fourth one. I've very cheerfully volunteered for Green Spain, which is, I think, an area of excitement. You know, I'm very much attached to the south of Spain, to Jerez, and maybe going up to Valencia, but actually this is I think you could find, in terms of drinking, or if you're in the retail business, in terms of selling wine, actually Green Spain gives you more or less all that you could possibly want. So here we are. This is actually a lovely photo of Chominechanis, which I visited on a trip with the members of the Gran Ordena Caballeros de Vino, and it is green. There's no doubt about it. You're looking out on the Atlantic, and it's quite complicated. That array of vineyards, it took us a long time to find. There are a lot of country roads. This is country roads, but you can see that actually there's a very interesting terrace here down to the left hand side of the house, and there's a lot of new planting going on. Very exciting. So let's move on to my next slide. So just to clarify the tasting order today, because it's slightly different from as you would have had it in your boxes. So we're going to have the Agarregui Chiqui first, then the Lagarde Condesa, and then the Pathobarantes. So that'll be one wine from Txakolí, one wine from two wines from Rías Baixas. Then we have two wines from Ribeiro, the Manuel Formigo and the Gallina de Piel. And then finally from Bietho, we have one representative, the Pétalos from Palacios. And as we've been reminding you, there's this great system. Just check with your telephone the QR code on the bottle, and that will give you all the data sheets. So that's what we're doing today. And here's where we are, Spain. Now, you all know Spain, even though we can't travel to it at the moment. But I just wanted to point out a few things. It is the second most mountainous country in Europe. So we have the Pyrenees, and we have this Cantabrian mountains here, which are very extensive. And we then have here Gredos in the middle, and we have Guadarrama too, and the mountain ranges go on. So it's excessively mountainous, and where we're going to be today is either within the mountains or actually on the coastlines. We can see that a bit more clearly with this map. So we're going to start over here, just between France and Spain, on the edge of the Pyrenees. This is the Basque Country. I've got a little pointer has appeared. Now I wonder how that's happened. That's a very up-to-date thing. Here's a pointer. Right. I'm in awe of this system. Great, thank you. So we're in the Basque Country here, and where we're going to be is in Getaria, which is just around here. But there are, as you will remember, three Txakolí denominations. Now, when I did my Wine and Spirits Education Trust diploma, we basically talked about them as if they were a unity, but actually they're different. They're stylistically very different. We're going to have one from Getaria, but there's also from Biscaya around Bilbao, there's different styles. And then sort of below Bilbao, we've got the ones from Álava. And Álava is the smallest of the three Txakolí regions, but also producing some very distinctive wines. I can talk about those a bit later. Then we don't have, because they're not really yet commercially available, wines from Cantabria region, but that's just beginning to grow. And I think those coastal, fresh, green wines are going to be super interesting. We move on, and we also are not happening to show today because, again, there are not too many of them, but you should try and dig them out. There are a few people bringing them in to the marketplace. Wines from Asturias, particularly there's a company called Bidas, and there are some others around, and it's a little region called Cangas, and they have their own wines. You can see there tucked away, far away from anywhere else. So they have their own varieties and a very pure, delicate reds with plenty of freshness, and white wines too. So then we keep coming around the coast, a much more familiar area of Rías Baixas, and obviously the home for pilgrims over many centuries of Santiago de Compostela. And so we'll come to Rías Baixas, which is all this sort of grey-brown colour, as we do the tasting. And then we're going to go to Ribeiro, which is this orange one just inland near Orense. And finally, we'll end up in Bietho. I would add that it's just worth remembering this border between Portugal and Rías Baixas. It's so close. I've just done a tasting of 100 wines at Decanter where we had, it was Albarino or Alvarinho. So it's Portugal versus Rías Baixas. It's very interesting, but thankfully for diplomacy, 2 wines came top from Spain and 2 wines came top from Portugal, and it was all blind tasting. There was no fiddling of the scores, but they are very close to each other, different but close. So here we are. First wine comes from Guetaria, from Untitled Chapter, which was founded in 1989. And as you could see, now let me show you, we were looking at, this is a lovely interactive map. Sadly, it doesn't interact here, but if you look on the denomination website, they have it. And you'll see that Chominechani's, the one that we saw, is overlooking Guetaria, that lovely harbour. And obviously the other key town is Zarautz. So our interest, though, is with Akariki Sheki. So let's move on, and I hope you have all your wines in front of you and you can enjoy that first wine while I talk about it. It's actually an ideal, we're talking just after lunch, and it's actually an ideal just after lunch wine because it's got that lovely freshness. I think it's the one that you come to first in the morning. It might seem a bit tight, but I've just had some salad and cheese for lunch, and it's perfect. Now, I particularly wanted to talk to you about this bottle because, and I know you don't have the bottle, but I have the fortune to have it. And it comes in this green Rhine bottle, and it is, I think Daniel backstage has helpfully stopped the sharing for me. So it's slightly confusing with some of the Txakolí wines because they are coming in different bottles, but the key thing is the stopper. So what we have here is a green stopper with the bottom carved out of the cork, so that when you put it back in the bottle, which there we are, it can pour wine. I'm not going to do it here, otherwise I should get it all over my computer, but we can pour wine from either one side or the other. It's trying to look like a built-in wine pourer. So the point, of course, as you know, is that with these styles from Guetaria, you're looking for CO2. Hopefully you all poured your wine from a height into the glass. It's that sensation of bubbles that is super typical of the wine. So I have to confess, I had quite a long discussion with the producer when I first encountered this cork a few years back. So I was pleased to see it, but I'm not sure in the UK market whether we need it. I think it's enough to take off the cork and just pour it from a great height and enjoy. So let me now go back to sharing my file. Here we go. Share now. And we should be magically back on this page. There we go. So yes, you can't see that green cork under the inside the bottle, but it's there. So we're here in Guetaria, which is the largest of the 3 Txakolí DOs. I'm just going to talk about them a bit more because obviously, as I said, the winemaking in Guetaria, the kind that you'll find in the bar, if you're going to go to San Sebastian and you're going to have wander around the bars, then very typically, especially to those of us who are tourists, they will be offering us a glass of something with retained CO2 like this. But in fact, if you go to Alava, to Arrabbiaco Txakolí, which is the smallest, by far the smallest of the DOs, of the 3 Txakolí DOs, they're making wines that you could mistake for, they're all still wines, and you could mistake them for, what can I say? You might mistake them for another Spanish, a Godello, something like that. They have a lovely richness. You know, if you wanted to, you could mistake them for some kind of Chardonnay. So they're well worth looking at. And then Biscaya again has its own styles. So I think we've all been, those of us who've done regular wine training have usually been given one of the 2 or 3 most famous wine producers imported into United Kingdom, if you're in the UK listening to this. But actually there are many more. So I think if you're interested in having writing about Txakolí, having Txakolí on your list, educating about Txakolí, try digging them out, because there are many different styles. Now, when you're educating about Txakolí or writing, as I did in my book on the wines of northern Spain, you have to talk about the grape variety. And first of all, you have to decide how Hondarribia Zuri is spelled. And I've used the word, I've spelt it Hondarribia, taking an etymology that comes from Hondarribia, which is a town in the area from which the naming may have come. And indeed, wine grapes uses, Jancis Robinson's wine grapes uses that spelling, but there are other sources who use Hondarribia. So I've used Hondarribia here. Hondarribia Beltza is the red grape that you can see on the top of the picture. And that does have some shared family membership with Cabernet Franc. Hondarribia Zuri is a whole different story, and I hesitate to go into it. I think you can read about it. People seem to disagree. Undoubtedly, within its parentage, then there are 2 other varieties and a hybrid, which may be part of it. But it's once you start investigating it, it's something I prefer to leave to others. But I think you'll get by with Hondarribia Zuri. And interestingly, this does have 5% Beltza. Most typically, you wouldn't find it in most white Txakolís. And actually, I'm not a great fan of the Beltza. You can get Beltza Rosados and Beltza Reds, and it depends on the producer. It's challenging to make wine here. You're on the Atlantic, so it's not, the acidity is rising up, as you can see here. Now, the acidity I've got quoted here from the technical sheets gave me a range, so I'm sorry not to be accurate, but I think it shows you that if there's acidity, it starts at 7.5, and equally that pH is quite distinctive. You're going to notice that. Which is where that keeping it on its lees and retaining the CO2 obviously softens it a little bit. So that's a Txakolí, and one I think is a little less well known than 2 or 3 of the others. I just wanted to say something a little bit about Txakolí, because it is a great, an iconic wine from Spain, which fell. So I say iconic because in the 14th century, 15th century, they were making terrific quantities of very good wine, which was written about. And indeed, up until the end of the 19th century, they had 250 hectares in this denomination, or in this area. It wasn't a denomination then, but they had 250 hectares of grapes. That's now, in the 1980s, they only had 21 hectares. So you can see phylloxera, economic collapse, a whole range of political and social issues led to this complete collapse in the industry. So what's very exciting now is that we have 33 wineries, all back on track. This is an entirely stainless steel wine, sort of straight in, straight out. And I've read that this is the wettest region in wettest dia in Spain, which I can well imagine. You know, you've got the Atlantic, you've got the Pyrenees behind you. Yes, though actually we're about to move now to an equally wet region, and that's Rías Baixas. You can see the rain is exactly about the same. So it will be interesting to see how this goes. So here is the map of Rías Baixas in more detail. So you can see the Minho River at the bottom, and here I can take my little pointer. The Minho River at the bottom divides Rías Baixas from Portugal. And of course, the question is, why is this region so divided? And at the beginning, when they made the denomination, it could possibly have gone into two halves. For instance, you can see Orosal and Condado de Teas could certainly have been one dio. Maybe Ribeira and Salnes could be another. I mean, there's a problem then. Why don't you do it? Well, it's politics between growers, but I think that the people there at the beginning recognized that in marketing terms, you absolutely need to work together. This is a symbol of it. It's one of the rare denominations in Spain that's quite so split up, but it's become a very strong one because of that. And one of the people who was behind that was the woman who runs Pathobarantes, which is one of the great producers, and Jason here says love her. Yes, Jason, I agree. She was one of the people that worked to keep it together. So that's but what we are doing now, which we haven't done before with a lot of Spain, is we're talking about the subregions, and we never really used to do that before. So for instance, Orosal down here in yellow is much warmer. Even within a matter of miles, it's much warmer. It has a more rounded tropical style, and it's been winning quite a few prizes in different wine competitions because of that. Condado Tea being a little bit further inland, again is a little bit further away from the Atlantic, and again that gives it a rounder tropical style. Sotomayor isn't quite really big enough to be able to say anything strong about it. And Salnes, though, is the home, the home of so many of the current top wines from Rías Baixas. But it's developing. People are looking for the old vines. There are some terrific old vines I've seen, which are 200 years old. It's quite remarkable. And the Ribeira de Olla also has its wines, but has never been as famous as Salnes, which is the heart of the Consejo Regulador. It's the heart of the history. There's the festival, all of that. So, and I just mentioned the festival because I have stayed in the Parador at the time of when I became a Dama de Albarino, and they do it during the Albarino festival. And for 4 days, there's people walking up and down the streets tasting in Albarino and having a great time. It's a marvelous thing to do because you can taste all kinds of Albarinos, but they do it until 5 o'clock in the morning. And if you're staying in the Parador next to the little street of Albarinos, with your window open over it, with the vuvuzelas blowing, it's yeah. But anyway, I mean, it means that what's nice about Rías Baixas is it's a very serious wines are produced here, but also people have a lot of fun. So here you can see the inlets, which are the low inlets of Rías Baixas, where there are a lot of production of mussels, a lot of mussel farming. Some wine producers are also mussel farmers, and other excellent seafood. So it's wet. We've got granite here and some schist, and particularly distinctive here is that you've got a lot of vineyards, a lot of very small vineyards, and a very few and a lot even more growers. So you will find that somebody he or she may have a hectare and a half of vineyards, but actually there'll be 3 different vineyards in 3 different places, not contiguous. So what are the trends in this region? Well, obviously, we learned about growing vines on the high canopy or paral, so distinctive of Rías Baixas. But increasingly, as new investment came in, then the regular cordon was produced. So now I don't have any figures for it, but there are some people going back to the paral because they do think it's the best way for the vine. Others prefer to have the machine possibilities with cordon, and I don't know which is more dominant. Then lees aging. Now, it may seem, in so many other parts of the world, it may seem obvious to talk about lees aging with white wine, but actually, for a long time, there's been a tradition of having quick in, quick out wines, and I think people are getting much more subtle and about really complexing the palate with lees aging. Oak. Now, oak is, I have mixed feelings about oak, and I think it just depends on each wine. It's just like with Sauvignon Blanc. Why would you make Texcoco when you could make a regular New Zealand great Sauvignon Blanc? But if you do it well, it works. So there are some oak wines. There are very few sparkling traditional method Albarinos, very good, and there are a few people doing wines for aging, and obviously one of those is Pathobarantes. Have wines that you release them with 30, 36 months, 40 months of age, and they are stupendous. And I haven't put here red wines because, in fact, something that's really interesting is it's a matter of 1, 2, 3% of plantings, but I think some of the crunchy, crisp red wines that are coming out of this region are delicious. So let us have a look at the first wine from Gil Family Estates, and it's Lagarde Condesa. I should have to stop myself from saying delicious, but you get that lovely, leesy, creamy character, which is so nicely controlled, balanced again against the acidity. You can see why Albarino so quickly rose ahead of a number of the white grape varieties to be in Spain, and certainly above Bura in its hard old days. Bura is different now. It really had a thrilling freshness and ideal with seafood. So you can tell that this has been partly fermented in French oak, quite apart from the fact if you look at the technical sheet, it'll tell you. But it's fairly, it is, you're aware of it now, and I think this is a 2020 wine, so I think I would give it, it's lovely now, but you could give it another year or two just to let that texture appear, but the character of the oak disappear. But what I really love about this is, and I'm finding this all the way through, the alcohols are really terrifically balanced. 12.5% is just exactly what you want to drink comfortably. Now, I should note here that this is Gil Family Estates. So the Gil family do terrific wines from Jumilla. They've been in Jumilla a long time and make wonderful monastrels, particularly a silver label is a very lovely wine. But they have investment across 10 or 11 different regions in Spain. And there is something, it's one of the threads within the story of Rías Baixas is the fact of foreign investment. That's to say, investment by people who don't come from Galicia. And there's a whole list of them. Torres, Freshnet, González Baez, Marqués de Vargas, Rioja Alta, the Ramon Bibal group, Zamora. All of them needed a white wine, which they couldn't get in the same way from where they came from, and recognized that commercially too, Albarino is something that can be really wonderful. Obviously, I mentioned the word commercially because we also know that Albarino, or some producers, have been chasing I can't remember what the word is, the golden goose. But there are a lot of Albarinos in the market which are perfectly good, but rather also ran. So just so many being produced because it became such a demand to have for everybody to have an Albarino on their list. But the good ones, I must say, are great. And I must say that the tasting we did with decanters, I say the Albarino versus Albarino the other day, the standard was just consistently high. I think we had possibly one corked wine amongst the whole collection, but there was nothing otherwise in any terms faulty. So that's our first Albarino. Now here's another one which is I'm very happy to show because it's 2018. So that's beginning to show you, it's on the way of beginning to show you that you can have Albarinos that take aging. It's not a young wine. It's not a wine just for drinking this week or tonight. So Pathobarantes Albarino 2018. So you may remember that I mentioned that one of the most obvious things about the Albarino in Rías Baixas is these tiny vineyards that you find them scattered in corners around people's houses. So the fact that this is a 12-hectare estate may not sound much, but actually it's very extensive. There are very few large producers in Rías Baixas, and this is in the Salnas Valley, in the heart of the home of Albarino. So I'm sure you know that Pathobarantes is the other wine that comes from the Marques de Morietas stable in Rioja, and they make it's as good in its different way as that Rioja is. They've been here since it's a very long-standing family estate, and the house goes back an extremely long time. Now I really wanted to show you this picture because you can see the granite posts on the parral. Now in fact they're linked up with what look like scaffolding poles. I may be saying the wrong thing here, but actually I mentioned scaffolding poles because very typically now, if you're a regular Albarino grower, and then you're much more likely to use scaffolding poles because they're much more available than you are to use granite posts. Now you can see that those granite posts aren't exactly tall. And you do notice quite a lot of the farmers are hunched up, and the older folk aren't as tall as their children, but they also have mini tractors that go underneath. So if you're not careful when you're driving around the streets, you'll find these mini tractors. But the granite is such an important feature of that style of wine. Now I'd like you to look in the background too in that picture, because it shows you the forests, and there's this lovely interplay in Rías Baixas between the sea or the inlets and these forests. They have had a problem with eucalyptus because at some point or other some clever person brought in eucalyptus and it has spread everywhere. So there's quite a lot of eucalyptus around, and it was something actually we discussed in our tasting of the Albarino were a couple of wines that had a kind of eucalyptus influence, but not in the least in a bad way. So Patamarantes. So this is at 2018. I think it's absolutely lovely now. You can see it's got much more richness, much more flesh as it's had time to settle into itself. And I think you can drink it now, and you can keep on drinking it. I just mentioned at the bottom La Comtesse de Barantes because there is the sort of how can I say, the other wine, the top wine, which is one that has spent much longer in an extremely large oak vat. So it's had oak influence, but of the biggest kind, and it's really quite interesting to contrast the two and to put them against other Albarinos. So I see from your notes there's yes, some prefer the Lagar, the younger wine. It's so punchy and fresh. I think now I can see outside the window the sun shining, and exactly a glass of that now outside in the garden would be very good. If you're eating, then I think possibly the other Albarino, the Pathobarantes, comes into play in a different way, and that's entirely your own choice. But certainly the thing to do is to think about the wine that comes from Pathobarantes, and there are, excuse me, a few others which have been aged for a minimum of 36 months. And indeed, the Wine Society, the year before last, released three, Jaime, thank you, Trico, released three vintages, kind of mini vertical of Pathobarantes, which was something like 2010, 2009, 2008. And I remember having a conversation with somebody who said, no, these wines shouldn't have been left too long. They're too old. But in fact, I think they turn into a marvelous Burgundian style. So something super interesting that you can do with the same variety in different ways. So the question here about, can you continue? Could you just keep the Lagar and would it do the same thing? The Lagar has been made to be fresh and enjoyable now. It's got great acidity, so you can see. So I think, give it a couple of years and it'll still be fine. But it needs to have, the older wines have had time, 36 months on lees does give it a whole different character. And the fruit fades back and you get a richness instead. And so, yeah, interesting. So at this point, just before I leave Ries Baixas, I see there's a question from Justin, which is quite interesting about Albarino, because it is, just over the border to Portugal, you'll find Albarino. So what we found, and this comes back to the soil partly, and the terroir too, is, I can stop sharing for a moment, talk to you. What we found was that the Alvarinos were more inland. Many, and the best ones, were on granite, really showed it. Whereas we had a number of young Salnes, Ries Baixas, very coastal, which were delicious, but were for drinking now. But actually, they each had, the good ones each had different characteristics. You knew they were different. You couldn't say, oh, this is the same grape variety, and within 100 kilometers of each other they've actually turned out the same, or 150 kilometers, because the really good Alvarinos were more inland. I'm still a bit on the fence about it, because we had some lovely wines, but I haven't written it up yet, so I can't. You'll have to wait till I've written it up till I can give you the full answer. But I think the message to take out for that, whether for Spain or for Portugal, is that actually the place matters, and it's not just enough a matter of coming from one part of Ries Baixas. You've got to work out which. So that moves us on nicely to Ribeiro. So Ribeiro is, as you may remember, from this side. Let's find it again. Ribeiro is this orange place. So it's inland, a bit less Atlantic, not quite continental, I think, but it's moving on that way. So that's Ribeiro. So this is the map. So it runs along the River Minho, which decants into Portugal. Well, Portugal is on the other side. Pauline, I've got a question for you. I'll try and remember to answer that at the end. Remind me then. And so the soils are decomposed granite, very distinctively, and schist. So it's much less wet, 800 to 1,000 meters. They still have a lot of growers. There's still, it's still an area which has lots and lots of minifundia. And this town, Ribadavia, at its heart, is a terrific place. If you haven't been, it's a wonderful, wonderful historic city. And these wines, which came from Ribadavia, were exported to England before the wines from Rías Baixas. They were very famous, and eventually what happened was there were various wars, and Portugal and Port took over. But the wines from Ribadavia and the Treixadura at that time, that was the wine that was exported to the UK and much loved. So I had to include this picture here because in Ribeiro, right up here at the top where my finger is pointing, is Ocabarino, where the very best octopus in Spain comes from. And I had the good fortune to be given an award in Ribeiro, and the award involved a lunch, and they cooked the lunch for 16 of us, and there was this wonderful couple boiling octopus, and they said to me, you're the guest of honor, would you like to chop up the octopus? I was like, no, really, I'm not an expert, you know, if you don't mind. So then you get the pulpo, and it's delicious, as you know, the way it's produced in Galicia on a small wooden dish with paprika and oil over the top, and it's, you know, you eat it with cocktail sticks, and it's great. So I had a plate, which is, I suppose, about eight portions. I was beginning not really to want too much more. My husband was with me, so eventually I think I got through about 2.5 plates, and then I said to him, look, you're going to have to eat it because I simply can't. And I said, I think it's only octopus for lunch. I don't think there's anything else. I couldn't see any cutlery or anything to tell us there was anything else coming. In the end, there was also meat and fish, but 16 of us ate 25 kilos of octopus that lunchtime. And that evening, there was the award ceremony, and the same people turned up with more octopus. So if ever have a chance to enjoy tapas with me again in London, I'll give you the octopus, and I'll eat your jamon, because it's, you know, I think I'm a topia with octopus, but it is the very best well-cooked octopus in the world. So this is Ribeiro, and we're going to have a different style. Now it's interesting, they have to do them within the hour to have a wine that's from Galicia, but of a quite different style. Wonderful. So what I get here, we'll all get different things. I get this lovely acidity, but I get richness too. It's a really interesting interplay of it's a quite individual wine. So you can get, I don't know, what do I get? I get lime pith from it, and something like grapefruit as a sentiment of something bitterness. And then, Paul, as you note, there's a softer mouthfeel, which is that there's residual sugar noted here of 3 grams per litre. Now, when you see, you know, residual sugar which is over 2, that's to say it's not quite dry, you think, oh, this is going to be sweet. But actually, I think it's it's just a brilliant freshness. So what I've got here, these chaps working here, are just to show you that something very remarkable about Ribeiro, as indeed a lot of Galicia, is its remains of Roman lagars and earlier. People were making wine here a very, very long time ago. There's a tradition that goes back a very long time. They haven't, the great thing is, for those of us who like very individual wines, they haven't been overrun by large producers. And I think that's partly because of the geography, both here, but particularly in Ribeira Sacra, the geography doesn't lend itself to extensive farming in Ribeira Sacra. We don't have one from here this time, but it's steep vineyard slopes really don't lend themselves to any kind of grand vineyard work. So what was interesting about this, because there's a certain element of this, thank you, Jason, there's a certain element of this which had a kind of chalky bitterness. And I note in the technical sheets that he says that he uses a few ripe stems in it, which is quite an interesting thing to do here. So he's got, that may be what I'm noticing in it, in what is otherwise a stainless steel made wine. And you notice too that this is a blend, and the point about Ribera del Duero, forgive me, Ribeiro, the point about Ribeiro is that while Treixadura is dominant, actually it's very, very typical to find these blends, Loureiro and Albarino, with quite a high dose of Albarino here, and then a variety which is described as unknown. So it's called Albilla do Avia. Avia is the river which runs just nearby, and Albilla could be some version of Albillo, because there are a number of Albillos around. There's an Albillo Mayor, different ones, different across Spain. So it could be that this is a similar family, but we're not quite sure. Anyway, single vineyard. Now I think that there's quite a lot of single vineyard work going on in Galicia, but it's not something that has become, it's only recently that word single vineyard has become so important. Now commercially, you need to be able to say this is my top wine and it's a single vineyard, so that's worth noting. So now we have another rather exciting wine from Ribeiro, from David Seijas. And as you see, in my PowerPoint, I've noted that we need to talk about hot springs, brave pigeons, and goosebumps. So we'll start with goosebumps. And the company is called Gallina de Piel, which basically means goosebumps. And they want you to feel, as you drink this wine, they want you to feel goosebumps. And well, let's see if you do. I think I might. The reason perhaps for that is the chap on the left, David Seijas, used to be a sommelier at El Bulli, and now the El Bulli Foundation has been created to write remarkable encyclopedias and publishing and do events, and he works for that now, as well as making wine with his business partner Guillaume Sanz, who's the chap on the right. And so this is quite an interesting one to taste, because there's lots more Treixadura in this. And then they've and I think you'll have to forgive my typing here, because I think I should have said Godello 9%, but my finger slipped. So first prize, the first person who notices that I've got 98% Godello here. But it should be, I think, looking at the maths, it should be roundabout single figures. And it's a little bit warmer than some of the coastal wines we've been having, but only 13%. So the wine means hot springs. Manard is hot springs, and Seixas is the Ribeiran word for David Seijas' real name. But also, I had to point out that there is here a little bit of octopus. The label is really, really, if you can get hold of a bottle, the label is really worth studying, because there's an octopus here, and obviously they too are pulpo lovers, like everyone who comes from this region. So the soil here is, yes, pink granite called Parino, and also sandy loam. So these people are with Liberty, and they're one of these projects which is making wines in a number of different areas, and I think driven by the fact that they're sommeliers, or that's their background, so they're looking just for a particular style of wine somewhere or other. So maybe an interesting project to keep an eye on. And now we move to Bietho. Now, Bietho is not even in Galicia, so it's a very significant region. In a sense of Castilla-Leon is so large and includes so much, and it's still slightly finding its way, but it's including, it includes Ribera del Duero, it includes Cigales and Rueda, it takes in basically everything between green Spain and Madrid, more or less. So there's a huge diversity in that. And even within Bietho itself, there's an enormous amount of diversity. So there are very different soils here. You can see slate, granite, limestone listed. The producer we're looking at here, who's Descendientes de Hotapalacios, they also have a particular volcanic strain just dividing their most famous vineyards. So there's a whole range of soils going on here. So you can see that we're in a different climate. The rain is less. The ratio of growers to vineyards is also less, and the wineries are really beginning to grow. Now, Bietho was a place where traditionally they made local wines, and they were pretty rustic, and they can still, some of them, depending from where you source them. So if you're buying Bietho, you need to look at the map, you need to go and visit them, you need to check out where they are, because the low-level vineyards are much less exciting than the ones on slopes, and that goes for the altitude too. Altitude does make a difference here. For a long time they didn't export. Now they're exporting. They're beginning to understand what the marketplace might want. So what we have here is the home church of Vilafranca de Penedès, and then we've got Ricardo Perez Palacios here with his horse, which is a first indicator of the fact that he's a biodynamic producer. All his wines are farmed biodynamically, and this is his one of his more famous vineyards. I was going to say it's most famous, which is Las Lamas, which you could see it's a very small vineyard. If you have a fortune to taste the wine, it's frustratingly small. It's that all that you're going to get from that vineyard, and around it, a lot of forest. So here we have the wine. So our only red wine, but I would say, as I said before, there's red wines to be had from Rías Baixas. There are red wines to be had in Txakolí and all along the coast, and in Asturias and Cangas too. So I think that's a trend to keep an eye on. That they're quite different wines. You just have to be a person or have a customer who likes that crunchy freshness. So we have Descendientes de Hotapalacios, which is the formal name of saying that this is the Palacios family. Now the Palacios family is in Priorat, and in Rioja it's Alvaro Palacios who's running the family business effectively, and that's the Descendientes, the descendants. Then Alvaro's younger brother, Rafael Palacios, is not so far away from Ricardo, and he's growing Godello and making one of the, maybe his top wine is the best white wine in Spain. I get quite excited about it. And so here we then have Alvaro's sister's son, Ricardo Perez, and his mother sadly died from coronavirus very recently, very sadly. So Ricardo has, who's a joyously faced person, has been really working very intensely in biodynamic farming to develop the area that they have in Bietho. He was one who noticed the soils and has been absolutely a pioneer here, and has also worked in the community driving cheese production and veg production, all sorts of things. So this one is as it were, the entry level. This is the most affordable of the wines in the series. And I say the most affordable because the vineyard with a volcanic fault, La Fariona, is it's not a thing I have much fortune to drink. I drink it from time to time, but it's exceptionally expensive, but it's beautiful. He produces wines of exquisite finesse. Now, I think this Pétalos is, you can see it's charged with energy, It has succulent, juicy fruit, but it's not. Well, it's not. It may call itself petals, but it's not a supple, smooth violet and rose petal texture. You know, there's a lot of character to it. So he has. You can see he gives it a little bit of new oak, but actually it's basically aged in second and third year oak. But I really encourage you to go through the Palacios range, and if you get excited by Bietho, just do it carefully, because I think now Bietho is beginning to do some very good things, and the Palacios family, obviously driven by Ricardo, have just introduced or encouraged the Consejo Regulador to introduce a pyramid of quality, so that you have a top wine, as you would have, as Priorat has just declared, it's Gran Viña, and then it goes down the tiers to village wine and so on. So between them, they're getting classification in Bietho, classification in Priorat, and that's quite an interesting thing. Yes, Paul, you've commented on the crispness of this. I think if you have this wine with chorizo, it would be absolutely mouthwatering, and certain kinds of cheeses. It's a wonderfully energetic wine. Now I come to the end of what I was going to say. So now I want to come back to your questions. So please do fill them up. So Justin, starting from the bottom, yeah, you have a question about the denominations. All of them were established in the 1980s, except Ribeiro, which was established in 1933. How did that happen? We've been having quite a conversation backstage about this, because in fact I found 3 different declaration dates for the denomination in Ribeiro, going right up to 1976. Certainly, there was a lot of activity at the point where Spain joined Europe in the late 80s. Then there was a huge amount of activity around that time as the funding came in, as Spain opened up to the rest of the world, and as it got European recognition. And that accounts for that sort of rush happening then. But there were people, I mean, similarly, obviously, Jerez and Rioja were, as you know, very early on. And also, I think there was one in the Valencian zone, which also declared itself very early. So, yeah, it's quite remarkable, because you think, Justin, that what happened after that was the Civil War, which completely divided the country, and then it was locked down under in the Franco years, when its agriculture and management was strictly directed by the government. So it was really only in the 80s that it's come out, which is why now we're seeing such an explosion of interesting winemaking from winemakers who've travelled. We had a question from Pauline about going back to Txakolí. How would you separate it from Vino Verde? Well, Pauline, the Txakolí obviously comes from a completely different place. It's a different part of the Atlantic. It has complete exposure to the winds. They have the wine on canopies, but they have to really prune those canopies very, very carefully to stop infection. I mean, you know, who would choose to make Txakolí? I'm not sure, because it's a really, really tough thing to do, to manage those vineyards. On the other hand, Vino Verde comes from a more southerly region, and the variety is different. And Vino Verde comes from a more southerly region, and it is a little bit more inland, and some of it a little bit warmer. So I think all of that makes it different. If you were tasting it blind, then I've just seen Jason's note about thunder and lightning. Yes, there's some more electricity in these glasses than there is outside. But if you were tasting these wines blind, then I think Txakolí will always come to you with that acidity. It will be really something really distinctive. It will lead on it. But I would say that, having mentioned the ones that come from Álava and Rabiaco Txakolina, those ones are more Godello-like, more Chardonnay-like, and you can be easily taken in. Now, any more questions before we close? Yeah. So thank you, Robin. Akaregi Chiki serves some of the best fish soup I've ever had in their winery, perfect with their Txakolí. Yes, I think it's super important to visit. I think that we have, that's why I was so excited to be able to have a Txakolí in this lineup, because we have a rather textbook image of what Txakolí should be about. And if you go to, you drink Txakolí locally in the wine bars, they'll give it you in a little glass, a small glass, and you can think about, these are wines that can be taken quite a bit more seriously. But does anybody have a particular favourite? Is there one that any of you would go back to? I'd love to hear some comments. Who's going to be the quickest trying to get an answer into the Lagarde Condesa has got and Jaime, what would I make of having Ribeiro with Christmas lunch? Be terrific. I have to say, there are wines produced in Dio Ribeiro which are beyond wonderful, and I think they have, first of all it's a blend, and then it's the lovely character of Trecciadora. So yes, I'll come to lunch with you, Jaime, and we can have a good Christmas lunch. So Brad's going for Pathobarantes, and Ruth also. Liz is intrigued by the Gallina de Piel. Yeah, no, I agree. Sarah is Condesa and Gallina Piel. Phil is the Txakolí. Yeah, Draw is the Pétalos, which is like a cross between Cabernet Franc and Nerello Mascalese. Yes, I think that that freshness is something that's so distinctive as well. And Pauline also is voting for Pétalos and Justin. I think that I think all of these wines are original. I think we could come away from this tasting and say, if somebody says, what were you doing this afternoon, tasting wine again? And you could say, no, well, I found this wine which was absolutely delicious. So please use your QR codes to go back and find out about the wines. And also, I think on the main websites, you can see about stockists in the UK. Definitely, if you haven't already finished your glasses, do please take the rest of the afternoon to finish the glasses. I would, oh good, Daria, as a vote for Pathobarantes, quite. So I would just like to thank the Backstage team in London and in Spain as well. And it's been great. So, and if you feel like doing any tweeting, there is a Wines of Spain hashtag, but I think the key thing is to go out and get shopping and support these producers. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you in the flesh. I hope quite soon. Thank you very much.